The human species has existed for more than 50,000 years. In comparison, the record of human history, from the ancient cities of Mesopotamia to our own computer age, is brief, a mere 7,000 years. But for as long as we've been able to trace the story of human beings, wherever they left a sign of their habitation on the earth, we find sacred places, tombs and temples, symbols and shrines, all evidence that humanity has always searched for meaning beyond the realm of the senses, beyond the daily struggle to survive. This is a story of 6 sacred wonders, 6 places that testify to the power of the human spirit. Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. That church is the Catholic Church, and this is one of its most hallowed sites, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Constructed over the tomb of St. Peter, it is the greatest church in Catholic Christendom. The story of St. Peter's begins with a simple fisherman in the Sea of Galilee. Called by Christ to be his follower, Peter's original name was Simon, but Christ renamed him Petros, or Peter, which in Greek means rock. He left all that he knew, home, family, and safety, to follow Jesus. And though he would doubt his own faith, though he would fail Jesus and even deny him, Christ would choose him above all others as the rock upon which to build his church. In Peter's story lie the basic messages of Christian belief. The power of faith, the gift of forgiveness, and the promise of everlasting life. Like Jesus, Peter was persecuted, imprisoned, and crucified. In the Roman arena of the Emperor Nero, in a final act of humility to Christ, Peter asked that he be placed upside down upon the cross. Tradition holds that Peter was buried in a cemetery on a hill nearby. Here his followers erected a small shrine where for 250 years early Christians came to worship. In the 4th century AD, Constantine, the first Christian emperor of Rome, erected a church over the burial site. It stood for 12 centuries. Then, early in the 16th century, Pope Julius II decided to build a new church and tore down Constantine's basilica. But more than a century would pass before the enormous church would be completed. 18 popes would reign during the period of the basilica's construction. Many of the greatest artists and architects of the Renaissance would participate in the massive undertaking. It is Michelangelo, together with the sculptor Bernini, whose work is most closely associated with St. Peter's. When he was only 25, Michelangelo completed what many consider to be the first masterpiece of his long career, the magnificent Pietà, the only work Michelangelo ever signed. Then, at the age of 72, near the end of his life, Michelangelo returned to St. Peter's as its most important architect. His final masterpiece would be the Great Dome, a double-shelled design that was the most daring of its kind ever attempted. St. Peter's Basilica was consecrated in 1626, 120 years after the first designs had been submitted. Shortly thereafter, Bernini began the addition of the massive elliptical piazza, or square, in front of the church. Bernini's design framed the square with immense quadruple colonnades, forming two arms that seem to embrace all who enter the square. In the center of the square stands the great Egyptian obelisk of Heliopolis, brought to Rome in 37 AD. The obelisk once stood in Nero's arena, and it is believed that St. Peter was crucified in its shadow. To enter St. Peter's Basilica is to enter one of the most awe-inspiring places in the Western world. The sheer size of the interior space is breathtaking. The church is filled with light that shines on a magnificent collection of statuary, altars, frescoes, and paintings. None is more magnificent than Bernini's Cathedra Petri, the throne of St. Peter in glory. Placed at the rear of the apse, the cathedra is actually a reliquary, a protective covering of bronze and gold. Inside is a wooden chair once believed to have belonged to St. Peter. Bernini enclosed the chair in a new throne, surrounded by sculpted clouds, light rays, and angels. The Cathedra Petri is beautifully framed by the superb baldacchino, or canopy. It covers the high altar where only the Pope may say the Mass. Soaring to the height of an 8-story building, the canopy is crafted out of 90 tons of bronze. Bernini's baldacchino stands directly below Michelangelo's magnificent dome. more than 400 feet high and nearly 140 feet in diameter, the dome is one of the largest structures of its kind in the world. The sun streams through its windows and fills the church below with what can only be described as a holy light. And directly beneath the soaring dome and the great altar is one of the holiest of all Catholic shrines. Here, according to tradition, lies the original grave of St. Peter.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
There is no better time to witness the grandeur of St. Peter's than at a Mass celebrated by the Pope. Each Pope serves in a line of papal succession that can be traced back to St. Peter himself. The Pope is both the Bishop of Rome and the foremost teacher of the faith. For Catholics, he is the final human intercessor between man and God. For 1/5 of the world's population, St. Peter's is much more than a building, however magnificent it may be. St. Peter's touches the spiritual heart of Catholicism, a monument to a simple fisherman whose extraordinary faith changed the world. He was Simon Peter, and for nearly 2,000 years, his followers have come to worship upon this rock. For more than 1,000 years, it was the world's greatest city, the largest, the richest, the most powerful. For more than 1,000 years, it was the heart of Christendom, the seat of an empire that stretched across much of Europe, the Near East, and North Africa. And when this capital of Christianity was conquered, it became the seat of another empire that would last for another 500 years. In this city, where East meets West, where the cultures of 3 continents have flourished, there is one monument that epitomizes the glory and conflict and history of 16 centuries. The city is Constantinople, today called Istanbul, in Turkey. And the monument is Hagia Sophia. Constantinople was founded in 660 BC as a Greek colony named Byzantium. In 330 AD, the Emperor Constantine renamed the city Constantinople and established it as the new capital of the Roman Empire. The first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity, Constantine decreed that his new faith would be the official state religion. And as the city of Rome receded into insignificance, Constantinople, strategically located at the crossroads of 3 continents, became the commercial, political, and religious center of the world. From this center, the Emperor Justinian, the grandson of Constantine, sought to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. In his capital city, Constantinople, he built the largest man-made enclosure in the world, the Church of Divine Wisdom, Hagia Sophia. It was intended to be both a church and a symbol of imperial power. Justinian saw himself as God's vice-regent with a divine mandate to propagate the true faith of Christianity. Hagia Sophia was to be the embodiment of heaven on earth. No expense was spared for the massive undertaking. A workforce of 10,000 men was assembled, including the finest architects, masons, stonecutters, and mosaic artists in the world. A massive dome was conceived, the largest of its kind ever built. This dramatic architectural achievement would not be surpassed until the building of Michelangelo's dome at St. Peter's in Rome, more than 1,000 years later. The interior walls and floors were paved with marble and other stones brought from all over the empire and beyond: Egypt, Libya, Greece, and Britain. Said the historian Procopius, "He who entered Hagia Sophia might imagine that he had come upon a meadow with its flowers in full bloom." Begun in 532 AD, the church was ready for dedication in less than 6 years. Upon entering his masterpiece, Justinian raised his hands to heaven and cried, "Glory be to God, who has thought me worthy to finish this work. Solomon, I have outdone thee." The interior of the great church was filled with light. Golden mosaics covered the ceiling, vaults, and arches. The dome itself was said to hover as if suspended by a chain from heaven. Hagia Sophia was the crowning achievement of Justinian's ambitious plan for Constantinople. But it was only one of many remarkable feats of engineering. Another was the massive wall that surrounded the city, a structure so imposing and heavily fortified that it was expected to last for all eternity. Indeed, the city's people believed that if the wall would ever be breached by a non-Christian foe, it would signal the apocalypse, the end of the world. The wall protected Constantinople for nearly 1,000 years. Then, in 1453, led by Sultan Muhammad II, thousands of Muslim warriors poured into the city, pillaging and plundering the heart of the Christian empire. One world came to an end, and another was born. Constantinople's citizens took refuge in Hagia Sophia, praying for deliverance. When the Sultan reached the magnificent church, he decreed that those inside would be allowed to go in peace, and that the greatest church of Christendom would become a mosque. Hagia Sophia, the only church in the city to be converted into a Muslim house of worship. A prayer niche was erected in place of the Christian altar, facing east toward the holy city of Mecca. Christian icons were replaced by Islamic symbols and texts. And because in Islam, the visual representation of all living things is held to be blasphemous, the magnificent Christian mosaics of Hagia Sophia were buried beneath a blanket of plaster. For nearly 5 centuries, Hagia Sophia remained an Islamic house of worship, and its priceless mosaics and other Christian works of art were nearly lost to memory. Then, in the mid-19th century, the reigning Sultan ordered a restoration of the mosque. It was his architect who uncovered the long-lost Christian imagery. When he showed his discovery to the Sultan lamented that Islamic law prohibited such imagery. In an enlightened stroke, he ordered the architect to recover the images in such a way that they could easily be uncovered again, if ever the appropriate time should come. Indeed, that time did come. In 1934, Kemal Atatürk, the father of modern Turkey, declared that this sacred site, which had served 2 great religions, should be preserved for all time as a museum. Today, Hagia Sophia, Church of Divine Wisdom, or Hagia Sophia, Pride of the Sultans, still looms over the great city, a magnificent reminder of the glories of not one, but of 2 great empires, and of the faith that inspired each.